Rain hammers against the windows of the mansion like desperate fists seeking shelter. The storm has stolen the electricity 3 times already tonight, and each time the darkness returns, it feels heavier, older, as if the house itself is exhaling something long buried. Clara runs through the corridors, her sneakers squeaking against the warped floorboards. The oil lamps flicker. Shadows dance across portraits covered in white sheets that billow like ghosts in the draft. From the master bedroom, a scream tears through the thunder. "Don't let them take me. Clara?" She freezes mid-step, hand gripping the doorframe. Her breath catches in her throat like a moth trapped behind glass. The voice, broken, desperate, ancient, knows her name. She pushes the door open. The old woman writhes in her bed, silver hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, fingers clawing at the air as if fighting invisible hands. "How do you know my name?" Clara whispers, moving closer, her pulse a drumbeat in her ears. Evelyn's eyes snap open, the same piercing blue as Clara's own, like winter skies reflected in a frozen lake. The old woman's breathing slows. Her trembling hand reaches out, fingers curling around Clara's wrist with surprising strength. "Because," Evelyn's voice cracks, tears spilling down her weathered cheeks. "Because I held you when you were a baby." The world tilts. Clara's knees buckle. And somewhere in the house, a clock that hasn't worked in decades begins to tick. Fade to black. 3 weeks earlier, Clara Morrison sat in the cramped office of Mercy Health Services, watching rain streak down the window, while Mrs. Brennan shuffled through paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone describing a funeral. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Morrison," the agency director said, not looking up from the file. "Everyone quits. 2 weeks maximum. Most don't last 3 days. Clara shifted in the cracked vinyl chair. At 24, she'd already learned that desperation looks different on everyone. On her, it looked like confidence. "I need the job," Clara said simply. "I'll stay." Mrs. Brennan finally met her eyes, a long, measuring look that seemed to weigh more than just professional competence. "The client is difficult, refuses to speak to most caregivers. The house is isolated, 40 minutes outside the city. No family visits, no friends. Just her and the groundskeeper. I can handle difficult." What Clara didn't say, she had no one waiting for her anywhere, no family to miss Sunday dinners with, no apartment lease ending soon. She'd been raised in foster care after her mother died when Clara was 8, a car accident that left her with fragmented memories, and a music box that played a tune she couldn't name. She was used to houses that felt empty. Mrs. Brennan slid a contract across the desk. "The pay is generous, room and board included. The address is Ashwood Manor, 1847 Hollow Creek Road." Clara signed without reading the fine print. She should have. The taxi couldn't navigate the final mile. The road had deteriorated into little more than a suggestion of gravel and mud. Clara walked, her single suitcase rolling behind her like a reluctant companion. Ashwood Manor emerged from the tree line, like something that had grown rather than been built. All dark stone and twisted iron, windows like watchful eyes beneath a slate roof covered in moss. The garden had long ago surrendered to wilderness. Roses climbed the walls in violent tangles, their blooms the color of dried blood. The front door opened before she could knock. A man stood in the threshold, 60, perhaps older, with silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and eyes that gave away nothing. He wore a butler's vest over a white shirt, formal despite the remote location. "Miss Morrison," he said, not a question. "I'm Jonas, I maintain the property." His voice was smoke and gravel, shaped by decades of cigarettes or silence or both. "Nice to meet you." Clara extended her hand. Jonas looked at it for a long moment before shaking it once, briefly, as if physical contact was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. "Your room is on the 2nd floor, east wing. Mrs. Ashwood's quarters are west wing. She sleeps poorly, wakes often. You'll hear her at night. Does she need medication for that? She needs to forget." Jonas turned and walked into the darkness of the foyer, leaving Clara to follow. The interior of Ashwood Manor smelled of lavender and old iron, a combination that triggered something deep in Clara's memory, though she couldn't say what. The foyer stretched into shadow, dominated by a grand staircase that curved upward like a spine. Every surface held a layer of dust that caught the weak afternoon light filtering through stained glass. And everywhere, the clocks had stopped at 3:17, a grandfather clock in the corner, a mantel clock above the fireplace. Even the ornate pocket watch hanging from a chain on the wall, its glass face cracked down the center. "What happened at 3:17? Clara asked. Jonas paused on the stairs, his back to her. "That's when the world ended," he said quietly. "For her, at least." Mrs. Evelyn Ashwood sat in a high-backed chair by the window of the master bedroom, staring out at the encroaching forest as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. She was thin to the point of fragility, bird bones wrapped in papery skin, silver hair braided down her back. She wore a nightgown despite the afternoon hour, and over it a shawl the color of smoke. She didn't turn when Clara entered. "Mrs. Ashwood?" Clara approached slowly, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "I'm Clara. I'll be taking care of you." No response, just the steady rise and fall of the old woman's chest and the faint whistle of breath through her nose. Clara moved into her line of sight, kneeling so their eyes would be level. Evelyn's gaze slid toward her, and for just a moment something flickered in those pale blue eyes. Recognition, fear. Then it was gone, replaced by the blank stillness of someone who had learned to live inside their own silence. "I'm going to take good care of you," Clara said gently. Evelyn blinked once, slowly, and returned her attention to the window. In the trees beyond, a crow screamed. Clara felt the weight of the house settle around her, like water closing over a drowning woman's head. 2 weeks, she told herself. "I just need to last 2 weeks longer than everyone else." But that night, lying in bed in the east wing with rain drumming on the roof, Clara heard it. Piano music, delicate and haunting, drifting up through the floorboards. A melody she knew by heart but had never learned the name of. The same tune her mother's music box used to play. Clara lay perfectly still, her body rigid beneath the thin blanket, listening to the melody that shouldn't exist. The notes were hesitant, as if played by someone whose fingers had forgotten their way across the keys, but whose heart remembered every movement. It was a lullaby, slow, melancholic, each phrase ending with a question mark of silence before the next began. She knew this song. When Clara was small, before the accident, her mother would wind up a wooden music box shaped like a carousel. The painted horses would spin, and this exact tune would play while her mother hummed along, braiding Clara's hair or folding laundry in their tiny apartment. "What's the song called?" Clara had asked once. "Amelie's Lullaby," her mother had said, her voice strange and distant. "It belonged to someone I lost." Clara had been too young to ask who. Now in this decaying mansion, 40 miles from anywhere she'd ever called home, that impossible melody rose through the floorboards like a ghost climbing out of its grave. She threw off the blanket and grabbed her phone, using its flashlight to navigate the unfamiliar room. The floor was cold against her bare feet. She eased the door open. The hinges groaned like something in pain. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that all looked the same in the darkness. The piano music was clearer now, coming from somewhere below. Clara descended the main staircase, one hand trailing along the banister, the wood smooth and cold beneath her palm. In the beam of her phone's light, she could see the portraits lining the walls, faces obscured by white sheets, creating the unsettling impression of witnessing a room full of executed prisoners. The music grew louder as she reached the ground floor. It was coming from behind a door she hadn't noticed earlier, tucked beneath the staircase, easy to miss in daylight and almost invisible now. She turned the brass handle. The music stopped. Clara pushed the door open onto a small parlor that smelled of must and old paper. A grand piano dominated the space, its black surface dulled by years of neglect. Sheet music sat on the stand, yellowed and brittle, but no one sat at the bench. No one was in the room at all. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She approached the piano slowly, her phone light casting wild shadows across the walls. The keys were covered in dust, except for a few in the center, which showed the faint impressions of fingertips. Recent impressions. She lifted the sheet music carefully. The paper crackled in her hands, threatening to crumble. At the top, in elegant script, was written, "Amelie's Lullaby, for my daughter who cannot hear." The air left Clara's lungs. Her mother's name had been Amelie Morrison, adopted at age 3, orphaned by a farm fire that killed her birth parents. That's what the foster care system had told Clara when she was old enough to ask questions. Her mother had been adopted by the Morrisons, who died in a different accident years later, and then Amelie herself had died when Clara was 8. 3 generations of tragedy, each one severing connections to the past. But her mother had owned a music box that played this song, had hummed it while doing dishes, had cried the one time Clara asked where it came from. "Someone I lost," she'd said. Clara's hands trembled as she held the sheet music. At the bottom of the page, barely visible in the failing light, was a date, October 17th, 1987, the same year her mother had been adopted. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Clara spun around, the phone light cutting through the darkness like a blade. Jonas stood in the doorway, still dressed despite the late hour, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be down here," he said quietly. "Who plays the piano?" "No one. Not for years. I heard it. Just now. Someone was playing." Jonas's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked like he might argue, or might confess something. Instead he stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. "The house makes sounds. Old wood settling. Wind through the walls. You'll learn to ignore it." "That wasn't settling, that was music. Miss Morrison." His voice carried a warning now, soft but unmistakable. "There are things in this house that are better left alone. Mrs. Ashwood has suffered enough. If you disturb her past, you'll disturb her peace. And we can't have that." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers about the sheet music, about the date, about why a song her mother loved was written for someone with her mother's name. But Jonas's eyes held something that made her close her mouth. Not threat, grief. "Go back to bed," he said. "Tomorrow will be easier." Clara climbed the stairs with the melody still echoing in her head, each note a question she didn't yet know how to ask. In her room she sat on the edge of the bed and opened her suitcase, digging through her few possessions until she found it. The music box. She hadn't wound it in years, hadn't been able to bear the sound since her mother's funeral. Now she turned the key slowly, feeling the spring tighten beneath her fingers. When she released it, the carousel began to spin, and the music box played the exact same tune that had drifted up through the floorboards. Amelie's Lullaby. Note for note. Perfect. Impossible. Clara set the music box on the nightstand and lay back down. But she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, watching shadows move in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like hands reaching, reaching, reaching. Somewhere in the house a door closed softly, and for just a moment, Clara could have sworn she heard a woman's voice, frail and distant, singing words she couldn't quite make out. Morning arrived reluctantly, filtered through fog that clung to Ashwood Manor like a burial shroud. Clara woke with the music box melody still playing in her head, a persistent loop that felt less like memory and more like haunting. She dressed quickly and went to check on Mrs. Ashwood. The old woman sat exactly where Clara had left her the previous afternoon, in the high-backed chair by the window, staring out at the forest with eyes that saw something other than trees. "Good morning," Clara said, bringing a tray with tea and plain toast. "Did you sleep well?" Evelyn's fingers twitched, the only acknowledgement that Clara had spoken. Clara set the tray down and began her routine, checking vital signs, examining the medication schedule Jonas had left, assessing whether the old woman needed assistance with bathing or dressing. Evelyn submitted to all of it with the passive compliance of someone who had long ago stopped fighting anything. But when Clara tried to help her out of the nightgown, Evelyn's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. "Not today," the old woman whispered. Her voice was rust and dust, barely used. Clara froze. "Okay, that's okay, we can wait." Evelyn's eyes, that startling familiar blue, fixed on Clara's face with sudden intensity. "You have kind hands," Evelyn said. "Like hers." "Like whose?" But the moment passed. Evelyn released her grip and retreated back into silence, her gaze returning to the window. Clara finished what task she could, then left the old woman to her vigil. The rest of the house revealed itself slowly over the next few hours. The kitchen was large and outdated, dominated by a cast-iron stove that Jonas apparently still knew how to operate. The dining room held a table that could seat 12, though it was clear no one had gathered there in years. The chairs were pushed in so perfectly they might have been glued in place. Clara explored the library, running her fingers along leather spines that cracked when she pulled them free. Medical journals from the 1970s, philosophy texts, poetry collections with pages so brittle they threatened to disintegrate at a touch, and everywhere those stopped clocks. 3:17. When the world ended, Jonas had said. Clara made a mental note to ask what actually happened at that time, though she suspected Jonas wouldn't tell her. She was examining a shelf of photograph albums when she noticed the staircase, not the grand staircase in the foyer, a narrow servant's stairs tucked behind a door in the library, leading upward into darkness. Clara climbed. The stairs ended at a hallway she hadn't seen before, shorter than the others with only 3 doors. 2 hung open, revealing empty rooms with furniture covered in sheets. But the 3rd door, at the end of the hall, was closed, and from beneath it seeped a thin line of light. Clara approached slowly. The door was made of heavy oak, its surface carved with roses that had been painted over in black lacquer. A keyhole sat below the brass handle, but when Clara tried to turn it, the door didn't budge. Locked. I wouldn't. Clara jerked back. Jonas stood at the top of the stairs, having climbed them with impossible silence. That room is off limits, he said. Why? Mrs. Ashwood's orders. No one enters that room. What's in there? The past. Jonas descended the hallway and positioned himself between Clara and the door. Some things are locked for good reason, Miss Morrison. I suggest you respect that. There's a light on inside. Timer, we keep a light burning. For what? Jonas's expression hardened. For the daughter who isn't coming home. He turned and walked back down the stairs, leaving Clara alone in the hallway with more questions than answers. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around her. Every creak of wood sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of wind through the walls sounded like voices. At midnight she heard it again. The piano. This time she didn't investigate. She pulled the blanket over her head and tried to convince herself Jonas was right. Old houses made sounds. But at 2:47 a.m. she heard something else. Footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to make the floorboards groan. Clara sat up, her heart racing. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the door. The footsteps passed, then stopped, then came back. A shadow appeared in the gap beneath the door, 2 feet, standing perfectly still. Clara held her breath. The door handle turned slowly, the brass mechanism clicking. "Who's there?" Clara called out, hating the tremor in her voice. The handle stopped moving, a beat of silence. Then the footsteps retreated, fading down the hallway. Clara waited 5 full minutes before she dared to move. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. Nothing. She opened it a crack, shining her light into the empty hallway. No one. But on the floor, directly in front of her door, someone had placed a single photograph. Clara picked it up with trembling fingers. The image was old, 1970s or 80s, judging by the color quality and the style of dress. It showed a young woman, perhaps 20, standing in front of Ashwood Manor. She was beautiful in a severe way. High cheekbones, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to stare through the camera into some distant point beyond. Eyes the color of winter sky, eyes exactly like Clara's own, and like Evelyn's. The woman in the photograph wore a necklace, a silver locket in the shape of a rose. Clara's breath caught. She knew that necklace. She reached beneath her shirt and pulled out the chain she always wore, the one possession of her mother's, that the foster system had allowed her to keep. A silver locket in the shape of a rose. Identical. Clara turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Amelie Rose Ashwood, 1987. The hallway tilted. Clara leaned against the wall, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Her mother's name had been Amelie Morrison, adopted in 1987. But this photograph showed Amelie Ashwood, in front of this house, wearing the same necklace Clara now wore. Amelie Ashwood, not Morrison, Ashwood. Clara looked down the hallway toward the west wing, where Evelyn slept. Mrs. Evelyn Ashwood. No, Clara whispered to herself. No, that's not possible. But the photograph didn't lie, and neither did the locket around her neck. Somewhere below, the grandfather clock that hadn't worked in decades began to chime. Once, twice, 3 times. At 3:17 in the morning, Clara stood in the hallway of Ashwood Manor, holding a photograph of her mother, and realized that everything she'd been told about her family was a lie. Clara didn't sleep again that night. She sat on her bed with the photograph propped against the music box, staring at the woman who was supposed to be a stranger, but wore her mother's face, her mother's necklace, her mother's name, Amelie Rose Ashwood, 1987, the same year her mother had been adopted. By dawn, Clara had constructed a dozen theories, each more impossible than the last. Coincidence, mistaken identity, a cruel joke by Jonas or someone else in this decaying house. But the locket around her neck argued otherwise, and the music box, and the lullaby, and those eyes, blue as winter, passed down through generations like a genetic accusation. When the sun finally crept over the tree line, weak and tentative, Clara went downstairs. Jonas was in the kitchen, preparing Mrs. Ashwood's breakfast with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed the same ritual for years. Who was Amelie Ashwood? Clara asked without preamble. Jonas's hands stilled over the teapot. For a long moment, he didn't turn around. Where did you hear that name? His voice was carefully neutral. Someone left this outside my door last night. Clara placed the photograph on the counter. Jonas looked at it. His jaw tightened, and something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or old guilt. You should speak to Mrs. Ashwood about this. Mrs. Ashwood doesn't speak. Then perhaps you should respect her silence. Jonas. Clara moved to stand between him and the stove, forcing him to meet her eyes. This woman in the photograph, she's wearing the same necklace I'm wearing. The necklace that belonged to my mother. My mother's name was Amélie. She was adopted in 1987, the same year this photo was taken. So I'm going to ask you again. Who was Amélie Ashwood? Jonas set down the teapot with a trembling hand. Mrs. Ashwood's daughter, he said quietly. The kitchen seemed to shrink around Clara, the walls pressing in. What happened to her? She left, a long time ago. Where did she go? Into a life that didn't include this house or her mother. Jonas picked up the breakfast tray. Some families are broken beyond repair, Miss Morrison. It's not my place to explain how or why. Now, if you'll excuse me. He moved past her, but Clara caught his arm. My mother died when I was 8. She never mentioned this place, never mentioned the name Ashwood. She grew up believing her birth parents died in a fire. Jonas stopped. His shoulders sagged as if a great weight had just been added to them. Maybe they did, he said softly. Maybe the people who lived here before 1987 burned up and left only ghosts behind. He left Clara standing in the kitchen, her mind reeling. Clara spent the morning caring for Mrs. Ashwood with new eyes. She studied the old woman's face, searching for traces of her mother. The shape of the nose. Yes, there it was. The way her hands moved when she was agitated. Clara had seen her mother make the same gestures. Even the way Evelyn held her head, tilted slightly to the left as if listening to something no one else could hear. Mrs. Ashwood, Clara said softly as she brushed the old woman's silver hair. I need to ask you something. Evelyn stared out the window. Did you have a daughter named Amélie? The brush caught in a tangle. Evelyn's entire body went rigid. Clara waited, her heart pounding. Slowly, Evelyn turned her head. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks, cutting channels through the powder Clara had applied earlier. She's gone, Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. My baby is gone, and it's my fault. What happened to her? But Evelyn retreated into herself again, folding inward like a flower closing for the night. She began to rock slightly, humming under her breath. The tune was unmistakable. Amélie's Lullaby. Clara set down the brush with shaking hands. That afternoon, while Mrs. Ashwood napped, Clara explored the house with new purpose. She needed proof, documentation, something concrete to connect the woman in the photograph to the mother she'd lost, to the old woman in the West Wing, to herself. The logical place to look was the one room she wasn't allowed to enter. Clara climbed the servants' stairs to the 3rd floor and stood before the locked door. The light still burned beneath it, steady and golden. She tried the handle again, knowing it was futile. Then she noticed something she'd missed before. The keyhole wasn't empty. A key sat in the lock, inserted from the inside. Someone had locked this room from within and never come out. Or they'd locked it and hidden the key somewhere Clara could find it. She knelt and peered through the keyhole. The room beyond was small, much more of a nursery than a bedroom. She could see the corner of a crib, its white paint chipped and peeling, a rocking chair, and on the wall, a portrait. Clara squinted, trying to make out details. The portrait showed a woman, young, dark-haired, holding a baby wrapped in white lace. Even through the tiny keyhole, Clara recognized the woman's face, Amélie, her mother, and in her arms, a baby with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to stare directly at the viewer. Clara rocked back on her heels, her breath coming in short gasps. That baby was her. She was sure of it. Which meant this photograph, this room, this house, all of it was connected to her in ways she'd never known. Clara stood and descended the stairs quickly, her mind racing. She needed to find Jonas, needed to demand answers he couldn't deflect with riddles and warnings. She found him in the garden, pruning roses with the focused intensity of someone trying to keep their hands busy and their mind quiet. I need you to open that room, Clara said. Jonas didn't look up. No, there's a portrait in there of my mother, holding me as a baby. The pruning shears slipped. Jonas caught himself before he cut his finger, but just barely. You couldn't have seen that. Keyhole. The portrait is on the north wall. Jonas finally met her eyes. His expression was haunted. Miss Morrison, I strongly advise you to let this go. I can't. Jonas, my entire life I thought I had no family. I thought my mother was an orphan who got unlucky twice, first with her birth parents, then with the Morrisons who adopted her. I grew up in foster care because there was no one left. But if that's my mother in that painting, if Mrs. Ashwood is really her mother, then you're part of a family that destroys everything it touches, Jonas finished quietly. He set down the shears and removed his gardening gloves. The Ashwoods are cursed, Miss Morrison. Amelie knew that. She escaped. She built a new life, a clean life, away from this place and its poison. What poison? What are you talking about? Money, power, secrets that eat people from the inside out. Jonas's voice was bitter now, years of contained emotion finally spilling over. Amelie wasn't supposed to exist. Her birth was a scandal that threatened to destroy the family name. So Evelyn made a choice. She gave her daughter away to protect her, to save her from becoming another casualty of the Ashwood legacy. Clara felt as if the ground beneath her feet had turned to water. Mrs. Ashwood gave my mother away. To a good family, people who would love her without the burden of the Ashwood name. The Morrisons, Jonas nodded. They were kind people. They raised Amelie well, kept her far from here, and when they died, Amelie continued the separation. She never told anyone where she'd come from. She wanted to forget, but she kept the necklace. Some things can't be forgotten, no matter how hard we try. Jonas looked back at the roses, their thorns catching the afternoon light. Your mother made peace with her past by leaving it behind. You should do the same. I can't. Clara's voice was steady now, resolute. Mrs. Ashwood is my grandmother, and she's dying alone in that house, haunted by the daughter she gave up. I need to know the whole truth, Jonas. I need to know what happened at 3:17 that stopped every clock in this house. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then, with the air of a man stepping off a cliff, he said, October 17th, 1987, 3:17 in the afternoon. That's when they took Amelie away from Evelyn. The adoption was finalized. The Morrisons' car pulled out of this driveway with Amelie screaming in the back seat, reaching for her mother. His voice broke. Evelyn stood on the front steps and watched her daughter disappear. And when the car was out of sight, she walked into the house and stopped every clock. She said time didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. She never tried to find her. The adoption was closed, sealed records. The Ashwood lawyers made sure there would be no trail, no way for the scandal to follow the family. Jonas looked at Clara with infinite sadness. Evelyn sacrificed her daughter to protect the family name, and it destroyed her. She's been dying inside these walls for 37 years, waiting for forgiveness that will never come. Because my mother is dead. Yes. Clara wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Open the room, Jonas. Please. Miss Morrison. She's my grandmother. I'm all she has left. The least I can do is understand what she lost. Jonas studied her for a long time, weighing something Clara couldn't see. Finally, he sighed and pulled a key ring from his pocket. It's not locked from the inside, he admitted. I just tell people that. Easier than explaining why I keep it sealed. They climbed the servants' stairs together, Jonas moving slowly, as if walking to an execution. At the door, he hesitated with the key halfway to the lock. Once you see what's in there, you can't unsee it. I know. The key turned with a heavy click. The door swung open, and Clara stepped into the room where her mother had been taken from her grandmother's arms 37 years ago. The nursery was a tomb, not in the sense of death, but of preservation, as if time had been trapped inside these walls, along with everything else Evelyn Ashwood couldn't bear to let go. The crib stood against the far wall, its white paint faded to the color of old bone. A mobile hung above it, fabric birds suspended on nearly invisible wire, frozen mid-flight. The rocking chair sat in the corner, angled toward the window with a knitted blanket folded over its arm, and the portrait. Clara moved toward it slowly, drawn by a gravity she couldn't name. The painting was large, nearly life-sized, and rendered in oils that had darkened with age, but lost none of their emotional precision. Amelie sat in the rocking chair, younger than Clara had ever seen her, perhaps 19 or 20. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. Her eyes held a mixture of joy and terror that Clara recognized immediately, the look of a new mother who knows nothing will ever be the same again. In her arms, wrapped in white lace, was a baby. Clara's hand went to her mouth. The baby had her mother's dark hair, and her eyes, even in paint, they were clearly that distinctive winter blue. But it wasn't the baby's features that stole Clara's breath. It was the date in the bottom corner of the portrait, October 1987. And the nameplate on the frame, Evelyn, Amelie, and Clara, 3 generations of Ashwood women, Clara. The baby was named Clara. Clara reached out and touched the frame with trembling fingers. She named you after her mother, Jonas said quietly from the doorway. Evelyn's maiden name was Clara Whitmore. Your mother wanted you to carry that legacy. But I was told... Clara's voice failed. She tried again. The foster system said my mother named me after a character in a book she loved. Maybe she told them that. Maybe it was easier than explaining the truth. Clara turned in a slow circle, taking in the room. Every surface held remnants of a motherhood stolen. A half-knitted baby blanket, a stack of unused diapers turned yellow with age, a journal on the nightstand. She picked up the journal. The leather cover was soft with wear, the pages inside covered in her mother's handwriting. Clara recognized it from the birthday cards her mother had written before the accident. She opened to the first page. September 15th, 1987. They say I should be grateful, that mother is protecting me by doing this. But how is ripping my baby from my arms protection? How is forcing me to sign papers that erase my own daughter from my life anything but cruelty? I'm 19 years old. They say I'm too young to be a mother. But when I hold Clara, when she wraps her tiny fingers around mine, I know that I was born for this. She is the only pure thing in this cursed family. In 2 weeks they will take her. The Morrisons are kind people, they say, stable, respectable. Everything the Ashwoods are not, but they are not me. And Clara will never know how much I fought to keep her. Clara's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the journal. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep reading. September 28th, 1987. Mother came to my room tonight. She hasn't looked at me in weeks, hasn't been able to face what she's forcing me to do. But tonight she sat on my bed and held my hand. She was crying. I'm saving you, she said. I'm saving you both from him. Him. We never say his name. My father, the man who built this empire on blood and lies, the man whose associates made people disappear when they threatened his business. Mother says if I keep Clara, they'll use her, use us, the way they've used everyone else in this family. Let her go, Mother begged. Let her grow up free of this name, this house, this poison. I hate her for being right. Clara flipped forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. October 17th, 1987, 2:47 p.m. In 30 minutes the Morrisons will arrive. I've dressed Clara in the white lace gown Mother wore at her christening. I've sung her the lullaby one last time. I've memorized the weight of her in my arms, the smell of her skin, the sound of her tiny breaths. I've put the rose locket around her neck. Someday, when she's old enough, maybe she'll wonder about it. Maybe she'll search for answers. Maybe she'll forgive me. Or maybe she'll be grateful she escaped. I can hear the car in the driveway. The entry ended there. Clara turned the page. The next entry was dated 3 months later, in handwriting that had deteriorated into barely legible scrawl. January 1988. I tried to kill myself tonight. Mother found me in the bathtub and pulled me out. She's not speaking to me. Neither of us is speaking. We are just two ghosts haunting the same tomb, waiting for permission to die. Clara closed the journal and clutched it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Jonas approached slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. Your mother left the house 6 months after the adoption was finalized. She changed her last name back to Morrison, the family that had shown her the only real love she'd known. She started over, built a life, and eventually she met your father, though that relationship didn't last. She never told me any of this, Clara whispered. She never said a word about this house or Evelyn or... She was protecting you, the same way her mother tried to protect her. Jonas's voice was gentle. The Ashwood legacy is poison, Clara. Your mother knew that. She wanted you to be free of it. But I'm not free of it, am I? Clara looked around the nursery. I'm standing in it right now. A sound from downstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps, heavy and hurried. Then Evelyn's voice, stronger than Clara had ever heard it. Clara! Clara! Jonas's eyes widened. She never leaves that room. They ran. Clara found Evelyn in the main hallway, still in her nightgown, silver hair wild around her face. The old woman was turning in circles, arms reaching out as if searching for something she couldn't see. Mrs. Ashwood! Clara rushed forward and caught her before she could fall. What's wrong? What are you doing out of bed? Evelyn's hands gripped Clara's arms with surprising strength. Her blue eyes, those achingly familiar eyes, were wide with panic. The storm, Evelyn gasped. The storm is coming. I have to save her. I have to save my baby. There's no storm, Clara said gently, trying to guide her back toward the bedroom. It's okay. You're safe. No. Evelyn pulled away with violent force. You don't understand. They're coming to take her. I can hear the car. I have to hide her. I have to keep her safe. Jonas appeared at Clara's side. She's having an episode, flashback to October 17th. It happens sometimes, especially during storms or when thunder cracked outside. Clara's head snapped toward the window. Dark clouds had rolled in, turning the afternoon into premature twilight. Rain began to hammer against the glass. Evelyn screamed, "They're here! They're here to take my Amélie!" She ran for the front door with shocking speed. Clara and Jonas chased after her, but the old woman was driven by decades of grief and guilt, compressed into a single moment of relived trauma. Evelyn threw open the door and stumbled onto the front steps. Rain soaked her nightgown instantly. Lightning split the sky. "You can't have her!" Evelyn screamed at the empty driveway, at the ghost of a car that had left 37 years ago. "She's mine! My baby is mine!" Clara reached her and wrapped her arms around the old woman from behind. "Mrs. Ashwood, please come inside. Let me go, they're taking her, can't you see? They're taking my baby and I'll never—" Evelyn's words dissolved into sobs. "I'll never see her again. I'll never hold her again. I'll never tell her I'm sorry." The old woman's knees buckled. Clara held her weight, lowering them both to the wet stone steps. Rain plastered Clara's hair to her face. Mixed with tears, she didn't bother to wipe away. "Mrs. Ashwood," Clara said softly, her mouth close to the old woman's ear. "I need you to listen to me." Evelyn was still crying, her body shaking with the force of grief that had been compressed for decades. "Your daughter, Amélie," Clara continued, "she grew up. She had a good life. She wasn't perfect, but she was loved. And she had a daughter of her own." Evelyn's sobs quieted slightly. "She named that daughter Clara, after you, after your maiden name." Evelyn went very still. "Amélie wanted her daughter to carry your legacy," Clara whispered, "even though she never told her daughter about you, even though she kept this house and this pain secret. She still honored you in the only way she knew how." "Clara," Evelyn breathed, "my granddaughter." "Yes. Where is she? Where is my granddaughter?" Clara's throat closed. She forced the words out. "I'm here, Grandma. I'm here." Evelyn turned in Clara's arms, her weathered hands coming up to frame Clara's face. Rain poured over them both, but neither moved. The old woman's eyes searched Clara's features desperately, finding echoes of the daughter she'd lost in the face of the granddaughter she'd never known. "Amélie's baby," Evelyn whispered. "You're Amélie's baby. I'm Amélie's baby. She kept you. She got to keep you. Yes, for 8 years, until she died in a car accident." Evelyn's face crumpled. "No, no, please. Not my Amélie. Not my baby girl." Clara held her grandmother as the old woman wailed, a sound of such profound loss that it seemed to tear open the sky itself. Lightning flashed, thunder rolled. The storm that had been brewing for 37 years finally broke. Jonas appeared with blankets and helped Clara bring Evelyn inside. They settled her in front of the fireplace in the parlor, the room with the piano that played itself. Jonas started a fire while Clara wrapped her grandmother in dry blankets and towels. Evelyn's eyes never left Clara's face. "You have her eyes," the old woman said. "You have my Clara's eyes. I have your eyes," Clara corrected gently. "All 3 of us did. The Ashwood women. I destroyed us. No, you tried to save us." "But Amélie, Mom lived a good life," Clara said, and realized it was true. Despite the poverty, despite the struggles, her mother had been happy. She'd laughed easily, hugged fiercely, filled their tiny apartment with music and warmth. She'd been free. "Did she hate me?" Evelyn asked, her voice small and broken. Clara thought about the journal upstairs, about the entries filled with pain and understanding in equal measure. "She knew you were trying to protect her," Clara said carefully. "She understood, even if it hurt." "Did she ever ask about me?" "She kept the locket. She played the lullaby. She named me after you." Clara reached up and unclasped the rose necklace from around her neck, and she made sure this stayed in the family. She placed it in Evelyn's trembling hands. The old woman clutched the locket to her chest and wept. Outside, the storm raged, but inside Ashwood Manor, in front of a fire that cast dancing shadows on walls that had known only darkness for decades, 2 generations of broken women held each other, and the grandfather clock in the corner, silent since October 17, 1987 at 3:17 p.m., began to tick. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Evelyn's tears subsided. She sat in the wing-back chair, wrapped in blankets, staring at the rose locket in her palm as if it were a holy relic. Clara sat on the floor beside her, exhausted but unable to leave. Jonas had disappeared into the kitchen to make tea, giving them privacy they both desperately needed. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said finally. Her voice was hoarse from crying, but steadier than Clara had ever heard it. "Tell me about my Amelie." Clara closed her eyes and pulled up memories she'd spent years trying not to forget. "She sang all the time," Clara began. "In the kitchen while she cooked, in the car. Sometimes she'd wake me up with songs instead of alarm clocks." A ghost of a smile touched Evelyn's lips. "She did that as a child too. Drove her father mad." The smile faded. "Before everything went wrong." Clara wanted to ask about Amelie's father, her grandfather, but sensed that conversation would have to wait. "She worked as a waitress," Clara continued, "at a diner called Rosie's. The owner let her pick up extra shifts when we needed money, which was often, but Mom never complained. She said honest work was a blessing. She was strong. She had to be." Evelyn's fingers traced the engraving on the locket. "Did she ever open this?" "I don't know. She never let me touch it. Said it was the only thing she had from her birth family. There's a photograph inside. Would you like to see?" Clara nodded. Evelyn's arthritic fingers struggled with the tiny clasp. Clara gently took the locket and opened it herself. Inside were two photographs, so small and faded they were barely visible. On the left, a young Evelyn, perhaps 25, laughing at the camera with genuine joy that Clara couldn't imagine the broken woman beside her had ever possessed. On the right, a baby, Amelie, Clara assumed, sleeping peacefully. "I gave this to her the day the Morrisons came," Evelyn whispered. "I told her no matter where you go, I'll always be with you. But I wasn't, was I? I let them take her and I never fought to get her back. You were protecting her. I was a coward." Evelyn's voice turned bitter. "I told myself it was for her own good, that she'd be safer away from the Ashwood name, away from the things my husband had done. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I chose my marriage over my daughter. I chose staying in this house with my husband's money and power, over fighting for my child." Clara sat up straighter. "What did your husband do?" Evelyn's eyes clouded. "Things that would send him to prison if anyone could prove them. Business dealings with men who made their fortunes in blood. Money laundering. Worse things I only suspected but never confirmed because I was too afraid to look closely." "Where is he now?" "Dead. Heart attack. 1994. Evelyn's mouth twisted. 7 years too late to save Amelie. By then she'd already disappeared into her new life, and I had become this. She gestured at herself with disgust. A ghost haunting a house that should have been burned to the ground. Jonas returned with a tea service, setting it on the table between them. He poured 3 cups in silence. Clara accepted hers gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "Why did you stop the clocks?" she asked. Evelyn stared into her tea. "Because time felt like an obscenity. The world kept turning, people kept living, and my daughter was out there somewhere calling another woman mother. Every tick of every clock was a reminder that I was missing her life, her first words, her first steps, her first heartbreak, everything. So you froze time." "I froze myself." Evelyn looked up, meeting Clara's eyes. "And I've been frozen for 37 years, until you walked through that door. You knew who I was." "Not at first. You were just another caregiver who wouldn't last. But then I heard you humming the lullaby, my lullaby, the one I wrote for Amelie when she was born." Evelyn's voice caught. "Only 3 people in the world knew that song. Me, Amelie, and Jonas, who heard me sing it 1,000 times. So how did you know it?" "My mother had a music box," Clara said. "It played that tune. She used to sing it to me when I couldn't sleep." She remembered. She never forgot you. Evelyn closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of dying embers and the steady tick of the grandfather clock that had remembered how to measure time. Finally, Jonas spoke. "There's more you should know." Both women looked at him. "About why Amelie was given away, about your grandfather." He directed this last part at Clara. "Charles Ashwood was not a good man, but he was a powerful one. And when Amelie became pregnant at 19... "Pregnant?" Evelyn interrupted sharply. "Jonas, we agreed. She deserves the truth, Evelyn. All of it." The old woman's hands trembled. She set down her teacup before she could drop it. Jonas turned to Clara. "Your mother became pregnant by a young man from town. A good boy, from what I understood. But he was poor, and the Ashwoods didn't approve. Charles threatened to destroy the boy's family if Amelie didn't end the relationship." Clara's stomach tightened. "What happened to him?" "To my father. He left town before you were born. I don't think he ever knew Amelie was pregnant. Jonas's expression was pained. Charles made sure of that. So my mother was alone. Not alone. She had Evelyn. Jonas glanced at the old woman, and Evelyn fought for her, insisted Amélie keep the baby, that they'd raise you here together, that the family could weather the scandal. But Charles refused, Evelyn said quietly. He said a bastard grandchild would destroy his reputation, that his business partners would see it as weakness, proof that he couldn't control his own family. Her voice turned venomous. He gave me an ultimatum. Either Amélie and the baby disappeared, or he would make them disappear. And I knew he meant it. Clara felt cold despite the blankets wrapped around her. So you chose the adoption. I chose the option where my daughter and granddaughter stayed alive. Evelyn's eyes burned with old fury. The Morrisons were good people. Charles's lawyers found them, made all the arrangements. The adoption would be closed, sealed. Amélie would be free of the Ashwood name, and you would be raised by a family that couldn't be touched by Charles's world. Did he ever meet me? Clara asked. My grandfather? Once. Evelyn's voice went flat. The day you were born. He came to the hospital, looked at you through the nursery window and said, make sure she never knows where she came from. Then he left. Clara absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. The grandfather she'd never known, who'd looked at her as an infant and decided she was a problem to be erased. I'm glad he's dead, she said simply. Evelyn made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. So am I. Every day since Charles died, I've regretted not fighting harder, not leaving him, not taking Amélie and running as far as we could go. She looked at Clara with desperate intensity. I was weak. I chose security over love, and I lost everything that mattered. You didn't lose everything, Clara said softly. I'm here. You're here because you needed a job, not because you wanted to find me. That was true 3 days ago. It's not true now. Evelyn reached out with a trembling hand and touched Clara's face, her fingers light as moth wings. You look so much like her, she whispered. My Amélie, my beautiful, brave girl who survived everything I put her through. She did survive, and she made sure I would too, by keeping you away from this place, by teaching me what family really means. Clara covered Evelyn's hand with her own. Family isn't about names or houses or legacy. It's about who holds you when you're broken, who sings to you when you can't sleep, who fights for you, even when the fight seems hopeless. I didn't fight hard enough. You fought with the tools you had, that's all anyone can do. Evelyn pulled Clara close, wrapping her arms around her granddaughter with a strength that belied her frail body. I've spent 37 years dying, she whispered into Clara's hair. But tonight, holding you, I feel like I might know how to live again. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside Ashwood Manor, the fire burned down to ash, and the clock kept ticking. Clara woke the next morning with her head on Evelyn's lap, still wrapped in blankets in front of the dead fireplace. At some point during the night, Jonas had covered them both with an additional quilt. Evelyn was awake, her fingers running gently through Clara's hair the way Clara's mother used to do. Good morning, the old woman said softly. Clara sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. How long have you been awake? I don't sleep much anymore. Haven't for years. Evelyn's voice was clearer this morning, stronger. But last night was the first time in decades I didn't have nightmares. Clara smiled. Me too. They moved to the kitchen, where Jonas had already prepared breakfast, far more elaborate than the simple toast and tea Evelyn usually accepted. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh bread. You're spoiling us, Evelyn said, but she was smiling. Special occasion, Jonas replied gruffly. They ate together at the small kitchen table, a far cry from the formal dining room that hadn't been used in years. The morning sun streaming through the windows made the house look different, less oppressive, as if acknowledging the truth had lifted some of the darkness. But Clara knew there were still secrets buried in these walls. I want to see the room again, she said, between bites of eggs. The nursery. There was a diary. I know the one. Evelyn set down her fork. Amélie's journal from that year, I've read it more times than I can count. It only went up to January 1988. There's more. Evelyn's eyes clouded. But the rest was damaged. Fire. Clara's heart skipped. What fire? Evelyn and Jonas exchanged a long look. May 1988, Jonas finally said. Amélie tried to burn down the nursery. With herself inside, the kitchen suddenly felt too small. She survived, obviously, Jonas continued. I smelled the smoke and broke down the door. But the journal, most of it burned. Only the first few pages survived. Where's the rest? Still in the nursery. I gathered the pieces but never threw them away. Evelyn asked me to keep them, in case. He trailed off. In case Amélie ever came back for them, Evelyn finished quietly. I thought maybe someday she'd return wanting to remember or wanting closure, but she never did. Clara stood. Show me. The nursery looked different in daylight, less like a tomb and more like a shrine to a love that had been forced to die. Jonas retrieved a metal lockbox from the closet and set it on the floor. Inside were the remains of Amélie's journal, charred pages, some barely legible, others reduced to fragments. Clara sat cross-legged and began carefully sorting through them. Most were too damaged to read, but a few pages had survived at the edges of the fire, their words still visible, though stained with smoke and water from Jonas's attempts to extinguish the flames. One fragment, dated February 1988, can't stop seeing her face, the way she looked at me when they put her in the car. She was only 3 months old, but I swear she knew. She knew I was her mother, and I was abandoning her. Mother says time will make it easier, that eventually I'll accept I did the right thing. But there is no right thing. There's only this. I am alive and my baby is gone and I don't know how to be a person anymore. Another, from March. Saw a woman with a baby in town today. She was laughing, bouncing the child on her hip, completely unconscious of the miracle she held. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her and say, "Do you know how lucky you are?" But I just watched from across the street until they disappeared into a shop and I could stop pretending to breathe. The entries grew darker as the months progressed. Amélie had been drowning and no one had known how to save her. Then Clara found a page dated May 7th, 1988, the day of the fire. I understand now why Mother stopped the clocks. Time isn't linear when you've lost everything, it's circular. Every morning I wake up and for a split second I forget, and then I remember and it's October 17th again. It's always October 17th at 3:17 in the afternoon, and the car is pulling away, and my baby is screaming, and I'm standing there doing nothing. I've been trying to move forward, but there is no forward. There's only this moment, repeated infinitely. So I'm going to end it. I'm going to burn this room and everything in it, including myself, and then maybe the clocks can start again for everyone else. The entry ended there, the rest consumed by flames. Clara's hands shook as she set the page down. She tried to kill herself twice, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Once in the bathtub, once in the fire. Yes, Evelyn had appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on her cane, and both times someone stopped her. The first time I pulled her out. The second time, Jonas. Why didn't you get her help? Real help? I tried. Evelyn's voice cracked. I begged her to see therapists, to take medication, to go somewhere that could help her heal, but she refused. Said the only thing that could help was getting her baby back, and that was impossible. So you just let her suffer. I didn't know what else to do. Evelyn's composure shattered. I had already taken one child from her by force. I couldn't force her into treatment too. I couldn't take away her agency again. So she left? So she left, Evelyn confirmed. In June 1988, she packed a bag in the middle of the night and was gone by morning. Left a note saying she couldn't stay in this house anymore, that every room was suffocating her with memories of what she'd lost. Clara looked at Jonas. Did you know she was leaving? I helped her, he admitted. Drove her to the bus station. Gave her money from my own savings. She made me promise not to tell Evelyn where she went. And you kept that promise. For 6 months. Until I realized Evelyn was dying too, just slower. Then I told her Amélie had gone to California. A friend of mine out there had seen her working at a diner, getting by. Did you stay in contact with her? Jonas shook his head. She'd asked me not to. Said she needed to disappear completely if she was going to survive. But she didn't go to California, Clara said. She went to Oregon. That's where she met my father, where I was raised. She moved around, Jonas said. Maybe California first, then Oregon. She was running from ghosts. Clara gathered the burned pages carefully and placed them back in the lockbox. She never stopped running, did she? Even after she had me, even after she built a new life. She was always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up. The past always catches up, Evelyn said quietly. Sometimes it just takes longer than expected. Clara stood and approached her grandmother. There's one thing I don't understand. If Mum wanted to forget this place, why did she keep the locket? Why did she play the lullaby? Why did she name me after you? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Because love isn't something you can burn away, no matter how hard you try. It survives fires. It survives time. It survives even the people who carry it. She touched Clara's face gently. Your mother loved me despite everything, and she made sure you'd carry a piece of that love forward, even if you never knew where it came from. Clara pulled her grandmother into a hug, feeling the old woman's fragile body shake with sobs. Over Evelyn's shoulder, Clara saw Jonas standing in the doorway, tears streaming down his weathered face. This house had held so much pain for so long, but maybe, just maybe, it could learn to hold healing too. That afternoon, while Evelyn napped, Clara found Jonas in the library, standing before the covered portraits with a bottle of whiskey and a glass. "It's not even 3 o'clock," Clara said. "Some days require whiskey regardless of time." He poured a measure and downed it in one swallow. "Would you like one?" "No, but I would like answers." Jonas refilled his glass. About why you stayed all these years, watching this house fall apart, watching Evelyn deteriorate. You could have left, should have left, but you didn't. Loyalty to who? Evelyn? Amelie? The Ashwood family? Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the nearest portrait and yanked the sheet away. The painting showed a young man, handsome, dark-haired, with eyes full of intelligence and warmth. He stood on the front steps of Ashwood Manor, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a book. "That's Thomas Ashwood," Jonas said. "Charles and Evelyn's son, Amelie's older brother." Clara stared at the portrait. "I didn't know Mom had a brother." She didn't. Not for long. Jonas took another drink. "Thomas died in 1985. Car accident. He was 22. I'm sorry. So was everyone." Jonas's voice was thick with old grief. "Thomas was everything his father wasn't. Kind, gentle, more interested in literature than business. He and I were—" He trailed off, but the weight of what he wasn't saying hung heavy in the air. Clara understood immediately. "You loved him?" "Yes." Jonas met her eyes. "In a time and place where that love could never be acknowledged. But Thomas loved me back, and for a few years that was enough." "What happened to him?" "Officially, drunk driver. Thomas was coming home from the city late at night, and someone crossed the center line." Jonas's jaw tightened. "But I've always wondered if Charles had something to do with it. If he found out about us and decided to solve the problem his own way." Clara felt cold. "Do you have proof?" "No. Just suspicion, and the knowledge that Charles Ashwood was capable of anything." Jonas turned back to the portrait. Thomas's death destroyed what was left of this family. Evelyn retreated into grief. Charles became even colder, and Amelie, who'd worshipped her big brother, lost the one person who'd always protected her. So when she got pregnant 2 years later, there was no one left to stand up for her. Thomas would have fought Charles, would have made sure Amelie kept her baby, but he was gone, and Amelie was alone. "Except for you. Except for me." Jonas turned away from the portrait. "I stayed because I owed Thomas. I'd promised him years before he died that I'd look after his mother and sister if anything happened to him. At the time, we thought we were being dramatic, young lovers making grand promises, but then he died. And I kept my promise, even when staying meant watching everything fall apart, even when I could have walked away 1,000 times." Jonas's voice broke. "I stayed because leaving would have meant admitting Thomas was really gone, and I wasn't ready to do that." Clara moved to stand beside him, looking up at Thomas's painted face. "He looks like he was a good person. He was the best person I've ever known." Jonas wiped his eyes roughly. "And this house killed him. One way or another, the Ashwood legacy destroys everyone it touches." "Not everyone," Clara said firmly. "Mom survived. I survived. And Evelyn is still here. Surviving isn't the same as living." "No, but it's a start." They stood in silence for a while, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the library floor. "Jonas," Clara said finally, "what happened to my father? Amelie's boyfriend. Do you know his name?" Jonas hesitated. "Why do you want to know?" "Because he's the only family I might still have. The only connection to my past that isn't buried in this house. His name was Michael Reed. He was a year older than Amelie, worked at his family's auto shop in town." Jonas's expression softened slightly. "Good kid. Really loved your mother. I think she loved him too." "What happened to him?" "Charles paid him $10,000 to leave town and never contact Amelie again. From what I heard, Michael tried to refuse at first, but Charles made it clear the offer came with consequences if declined." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that would have put Michael's father out of business and his younger siblings on the street." Jonas's voice was bitter. "Charles was very good at finding leverage. Do you know where Michael went?" "No. And I suspect Charles made sure Michael didn't know Amelie was pregnant. He left about 3 months before you were born." Clara absorbed this. Another connection severed. Another chance at family stolen by her grandfather's cruelty. "I want to find him," she said. "After 37 years, he could be anywhere, could be dead, or he could be alive, could have a family, could want to know he has a daughter. Jonas studied her for a long moment. "You have your mother's determination," he finally said, "and your grandmother's stubbornness. God help us all." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "Will you help me look?" Jonas sighed. "Against my better judgment, yes. I kept some of Amélie's things from that time. Letters, photographs? There might be something that could lead you to him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, you might not like what you find." "I'm not looking for a fairy tale," Clara said. "Just truth. I've spent my whole life not knowing where I came from. Now I want to know everything, even the ugly parts." "Then you've come to the right house." Jonas gestured at the covered portraits lining the walls. The Ashwoods have always been experts at ugly truths. He moved to a cabinet in the corner and retrieved a wooden box covered in dust. "These were Amélie's. I saved them when she left. Thought maybe someday." He set the box on the desk. Someday never came. Until now. Clara opened the box carefully. Inside were fragments of her mother's teenage life, ticket stubs from movies, pressed flowers, a class ring, photographs, and letters. Dozens of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, all addressed to "My Amélie" in masculine handwriting. "Michael wrote to her for 6 months before Charles found out," Jonas explained. "After that the letters stopped coming, or more likely, Charles intercepted them." Clara untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. The paper was thin, the ink faded, but still legible. "My Amélie, I know you're probably sick of me saying this, but I can't help it. I think about you constantly. In the shop, when I'm supposed to be focused on engine repair, I'm replaying our conversation from last night. The way you laugh, the way you see the world. Your father still looks at me like I'm dirt on his shoe when I pick you up. I keep wanting to tell him I'll treat you like the treasure you are. But I don't think he cares. I don't think anything I do will ever be good enough for an Ashwood. But here's the thing. I'm not doing this for him, I'm doing it for you. Meet me Friday at our spot. Yours always, Michael." Clara's throat tightened. This boy, this young man who'd loved her mother, had written with such earnest affection, such hope, and Charles had destroyed it. She read through more letters, each one revealing pieces of a relationship built in stolen moments. Midnight meetings, secret phone calls, a love forced to hide because of money and status and the Ashwood name. The last letter, dated February 1987, was different. "Amélie, your father came to the shop today. He made me an offer I'm supposed to refuse. $10,000 to leave town, to never see you again, to pretend what we have doesn't exist. He said if I don't take the money, things will get bad for my family. He didn't specify how, but he didn't have to. Everyone knows what happens to people who cross Charles Ashwood. I told him I need to talk to you first. He said you don't want to see me anymore, that you're done slumming with the town mechanic. I don't believe him. But Amélie, I need to hear it from you. Meet me at our spot this weekend, please. If you don't come, I'll know he's telling the truth and I'll leave. I love you. That will never change, no matter what happens. Michael." Clara looked up at Jonas with tears in her eyes. Did she go to meet him? Jonas shook his head slowly. Charles locked her in her room that entire weekend, told everyone she had the flu. By Monday, Michael was gone. She never got to say goodbye. No, and she never knew he'd wanted to fight for her. Charles made sure of that. Jonas's voice was heavy with old anger. 3 weeks later, Amélie realized she was pregnant, and Charles's cruelty became even worse because now there was proof of what he'd tried to erase. Clara carefully refolded the letters and placed them back in the box. "I'm going to find him," she said with quiet determination. "Michael Reed deserves to know he has a daughter, and I deserve to know my father. It's a long shot after all this time. I don't care. Someone in this family should get a chance at redemption." Clara met Jonas's eyes. "Will you help me search?" Jonas smiled sadly. "Thomas would have wanted me to. So yes, I'll help." Over the next week, Clara and Jonas worked together to track down Michael Reed. They started with phone books from nearby towns, internet searches that yielded frustratingly little, and calls to the few auto shops still operating in the area. Evelyn watched their efforts with a mixture of hope and fear. She'd improved dramatically since the revelation, speaking more, eating better, even walking short distances around the house with Clara's support. But the possibility of finding Michael brought back memories she'd tried to bury. "What if he hates us?" Evelyn asked one evening as Clara helped her into bed. "What if he blames me for taking Amélie away? Then we'll accept his anger," Clara said gently. "But at least he'll know the truth. At least he'll know he has a daughter who wants to meet him. A daughter he never knew about. That wasn't his fault, or yours, or Mom's." Clara pulled the blanket up to Evelyn's shoulders. It was Charles's fault, and he's gone. We don't have to keep living by his rules. Evelyn squeezed Clara's hand. When did you become so wise? I learned from the two strongest women I know. Clara smiled. My mother and my grandmother. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Jonas burst into the kitchen where Clara was preparing lunch, waving a piece of paper. I found him. Clara nearly dropped the knife she was holding. What? Where? Seattle. He owns a mechanic shop. Reed Family Auto. Been there for 20 years. Jonas set the paper down. It was a printout of a website showing a middle-aged man with grey-streaked hair standing in front of a garage bay, arms crossed, smiling at the camera. Clara stared at the photograph, searching for signs of herself in his features. The nose, yes, that was hers. The shape of his hands. The way he stood with weight shifted to one hip. That's my father, she whispered. Looks like it. Jonas pointed to text on the website. He has a family. Wife, 2 kids. Teenagers from the look of it. Clara's chest tightened. I have siblings. Half-siblings, yes. The weight of it hit her all at once. She wasn't alone. Somewhere in Seattle she had a father who didn't know she existed, and a family she'd never met. Does he know we're looking for him? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Jonas pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Clara, you need to think carefully about this. Reaching out to Michael will upend his life. He's built a family, a business, a whole existence that doesn't include the Ashwoods or what happened 37 years ago. He deserves to know. I agree. But this isn't just about what he deserves. It's about what his family deserves too. His wife, his kids. They're innocent in this. Clara sat down across from him. What are you saying? I'm saying tread carefully. Prepare yourself for the possibility that he might not want contact, that learning about you might cause him pain rather than joy. Or it might give him closure. It might answer questions he's had for decades. Maybe. Jonas looked old suddenly, worn down by years of keeping secrets. I just don't want you to get hurt. I'm already hurt, Clara said softly. I've been hurt my whole life by not knowing where I came from. At least now I have a chance to fill in the blanks. Jonas nodded slowly. Then let's write him a letter. They spent hours crafting the message. It needed to be honest but not overwhelming, compassionate but not presumptuous. A door opened, not forced. In the end, Clara wrote from the heart, Dear Mr. Reed, my name is Clara Morrison. I'm 24 years old and I believe you knew my mother, Amelie Morrison, in 1987. I'm writing to you because I recently discovered I was born in October 1987, approximately 9 months after you and my mother lost contact. I have reason to believe you may be my biological father. I want to be clear. I'm not looking for anything from you. No money, no obligation. I simply want to know my history, and if you're willing to meet the man who gave me life. My mother passed away when I was 8 years old. Before she died, she never spoke about my father or her life before I was born. It wasn't until I came to work at Ashwood Manor and met my grandmother, Evelyn Ashwood, that I learned the truth about our family. I understand this letter may come as a shock. If you need time to process, or if you prefer not to respond at all, I'll understand. But if you have any interest in meeting me, I would be honored to hear from you. I've included my phone number and email address below. I've also enclosed a photograph of myself and one of my mother, so you can see the resemblance. Whatever you decide, please know that I hold no resentment toward you. From what I've learned, you loved my mother deeply and were kept from her by forces beyond your control. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Respectfully, Clara Morrison. They included 2 photographs, one of Clara from the previous year and one of Amelie at 19, taken from the collection Jonas had saved. Jonas addressed the envelope while Clara sealed the letter with trembling hands. Once we send this, there's no taking it back, he warned. I know. You're sure? Clara thought of her mother, who'd carried the weight of her secrets until the day she died, who'd played the lullaby and worn the locket but never explained why. I'm sure. Mum spent her life running from the truth. I'm done running. Jonas drove to the post office that afternoon and mailed the letter. Then they waited. 5 days later, Clara's phone rang with a Seattle area code. Her heart stopped. Hello? Is this Clara Morrison? The voice was male, older, shaking slightly. Yes, this is Michael Reed. Clara sat down hard on the nearest chair. Mr. Reed, thank you for calling. I got your letter. He paused and she could hear him breathing, trying to compose himself. I've read it about 100 times. I don't know how to... Take your time. You're Amelie's daughter. Yes, and you think I'm your father. The timeline matches. And I have letters you wrote to my mother in 1987. Michael made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I never stopped thinking about her. Even after I got married, even after I had my kids, there was always a part of me that wondered what happened to Amelie Ashwood. If she was happy, if she ever thought about me. She named me after her grandmother, Clara said. She kept your letters. She played a lullaby that her mother wrote. She held on to pieces of her past even though it hurt. She died? Car accident. When I was 8. God! Michael's voice broke. I'm so sorry. She was the kindest person I'd ever met. Even though her family had everything and mine had nothing, she never made me feel less than. She saw me. She loved you. I loved her too. So much. He was crying now, not bothering to hide it. Charles Ashwood came to my shop and told me she didn't want to see me anymore, that I was embarrassing her. I believed him because I was young and stupid, and I didn't think someone like Amelie could really love someone like me. She tried to meet you that last weekend. Charles locked her in her room. What? She didn't know you'd left town. Didn't know Charles had threatened your family. She thought you'd abandoned her. Clara's own voice was thick with tears. 3 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant with me. Michael was silent for a long moment. I have a daughter, he finally whispered. I have a daughter. And Amelie went through her pregnancy alone. And I wasn't there. You didn't know. That doesn't make it better. No, but it's the truth. And truth is all we have now. Michael took a shaky breath. Do you want to meet? More than anything. I need to talk to my wife first. She deserves to know everything. And my kids, he trailed off. I understand. Take whatever time you need. Can I see a picture of you? Is there one online somewhere? I can text you one if you give me your number. He rattled off digits. Clara saved them with trembling fingers. Mr. Reed. Michael, please. Michael, I know this is complicated. I'm not trying to disrupt your life or insert myself where I don't belong. I just wanted you to know I exist. Clara, his voice was firm now, steadier. You're not disrupting anything. You're answering a question I've carried for 37 years. Whatever happens next, I'm glad you found me. After they hung up, Clara sat in silence for a long time, phone clutched to her chest. Evelyn found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face. What happened? The old woman asked, alarmed. I talked to my father, Clara whispered. I talked to my father and he wants to meet me. Evelyn pulled Clara into her arms and held her while she cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being whole. Michael Reed arrived at Ashwood Manor on a Saturday morning in late spring. Clara watched from the front window as a truck pulled into the driveway. Newer model, well-maintained, with Reed Family Auto painted on the side. A man climbed out slowly, staring up at the house with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Fear, awe, old pain. She opened the door before he could knock. They stood facing each other for a long moment. This father and daughter who'd been separated by lies and money and a dead man's cruelty. Michael Reed was in his late 50s, with grey in his hair and lines around his eyes. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots that had seen better days. His hands were scarred from years of mechanical work, the hands of someone who built and fixed things for a living. He looked nothing like the young man in the letters, but his eyes, brown and warm and kind, were exactly as Clara had imagined. Clara, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Dad, she replied, testing the word. Michael's face crumpled. He pulled her into a hug that smelled of motor oil and laundry detergent and something indefinably safe. Clara hugged him back, feeling decades of absence collapse into this single moment. I'm sorry, Michael whispered. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. You're here now, that's what matters. They stood on the front steps of Ashwood Manor, holding each other, while Jonas watched from the window with tears streaming down his weathered face. Inside, Clara led Michael to the parlour where Evelyn waited. The old woman sat in her chair by the window, dressed in her best dress, a faded blue that matched her eyes. Jonas had helped her with her hair, braiding it neatly down her back. She looked terrified. Michael stopped in the doorway, staring at the woman who'd given his daughter away. Mrs. Ashwood, he said stiffly. Mr. Reed. Evelyn's voice was barely audible. Thank you for coming. An awkward silence stretched between them. Clara looked from her grandmother to her father, seeing the weight of history hanging in the air like smoke. Grandma has something she wants to tell you, Clara said gently. Evelyn's hands trembled in her lap. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry, she said, for what my husband did to you, for the threats, the money, the lies, for taking Amelie away from you before either of you knew about the baby. Michael's jaw was tight. Why didn't you fight him? Why didn't you protect your daughter? Because I was a coward. Evelyn met his eyes directly. I chose safety over love. I chose the Ashwood name over my daughter's happiness. And both Amelie and Clara paid the price for my weakness. They did, Michael agreed. Amelie went through her pregnancy alone, gave up her baby, tried to kill herself twice, all because you couldn't stand up to your husband. Clara winced, but Evelyn didn't flinch. You're right. I should have left Charles the moment he threatened Amelie. Should have taken her and run as far as we could go, but I didn't, and I've lived with that guilt for 37 years. Guilt doesn't bring Amelie back. No, Evelyn's voice broke. Nothing brings her back. But maybe, she gestured at Clara, maybe we can make sure her daughter doesn't grow up feeling as alone as Amelie did. Michael looked at Clara, his expression softening. She looks like her, he said quietly. Like Amelie. She has your nose, Evelyn replied. Despite everything, Michael smiled slightly. Yeah, she does. Clara moved to stand between them, taking her grandmother's hand in one of hers and her father's in the other. I know this is strange, she said. I know we can't erase the past or fix what was broken, but we're here, the three of us. 3 generations connected by Amelie's love. She should be here, Michael said, his voice rough. She is, Evelyn whispered. She's in Clara's eyes, in her voice, in the way she fights for truth even when it's painful. The old woman looked up at Michael. Amelie loved you until the day she died. I know that because she kept your letters, because she named Clara after my mother, keeping the connection alive, because everything she did was to protect her daughter the way I failed to protect mine. Michael's shoulders sagged. He pulled his hand from Clara's and sat down heavily in the chair across from Evelyn. I have a family in Seattle, he said. A wife who knows everything now. 2 teenagers who are trying to process the fact that they have an older half-sister. How did they take it? Clara asked. My wife was incredible, understanding in a way I didn't deserve. Michael rubbed his face. The kids are confused but curious. They want to meet you. Clara's heart leapt. Really? Yeah, if you want to meet them. I do, very much. Michael managed a weak smile. They're good kids. Bit wild but good hearts. You'll like them. I'm sure I will. Evelyn cleared her throat softly. Mr. Reed, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I have one request. What? Tell me about Amelie, the girl you knew. I only got to see her pain and suffering after you left. I want to know what she was like when she was happy. Michael was quiet for a long moment, his expression distant. Then he started talking. He told them about midnight meetings at the old quarry, where he and Amelie would lie on the hood of his truck and count stars, about how she'd loved terrible horror movies and would grip his arm during the scary parts, even though she was laughing, about the way she'd sneak him books from the Ashwood Library, first editions, rare volumes, because she knew he loved to read but couldn't afford them. She was smart, Michael said, not just book smart, though she was that too. She was emotionally intelligent. She saw people, really saw them. She knew I was insecure about my background, about not having money or education, and she never once made me feel less than. She made me feel like I mattered. Evelyn was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She got that from her brother, she said. Thomas had the same gift, the same kindness. The one who died? Yes. Evelyn wiped her eyes. He would have liked you, would have stood up for you and Amelie against Charles, but he wasn't there. No, and without him I didn't have the strength to fight alone. They sat in silence for a while, 3 people bound by love and loss, and a woman who'd tried so hard to escape her past that she'd never told her daughter the truth about where she came from. Finally, Clara spoke. Mum used to sing me a lullaby. She said it belonged to someone she lost. I think she meant both of you. Grandma who wrote it and Dad who she had to give up. Will you sing it for us? Michael asked. Clara's voice was shaky at first, but it grew stronger as she sang the melody her mother had sung, that Evelyn had written, that had echoed through this house for decades. Sleep now, little one, dream of days to come. When the world is kind and the hurt is done, you are loved, you are safe, you are mine, my Amelie, my love, my sunshine. By the time she finished, all 3 of them were crying. Michael stayed for 3 days. In that time, Clara watched her father and grandmother navigate their complicated relationship. Not quite forgiveness, but something approaching understanding. They told stories about Amelie, piecing together the girl they'd both loved from different angles. Michael's stories were full of joy and rebellion. Evelyn's were tinged with regret, but also with pride. Together they created a fuller picture of Amelie than Clara had ever had before. On the second day, Jonas brought out the portrait from the nursery, the painting of Amélie holding baby Clara. "It's been damaged," he explained, showing them the water stains and smoke damage along the edges from the fire, "but I think it can be restored." Michael stared at the portrait for a long time, his hand covering his mouth. "That's her," he whispered. "That's my Amélie. And your daughter," Evelyn added softly. Clara studied the portrait with new eyes. Now that she knew the full story, she could see the complexity in her mother's expression, joy at holding her baby, terror at knowing she'd soon be taken away. "I want to restore it," Clara said suddenly. "Professionally, I want this portrait to hang in the main hall where everyone can see it." "That seems fitting," Jonas agreed. Over the next few months, Clara coordinated with art restorers in the city. The portrait was carefully cleaned, the damage repaired, the colors brought back to their original vibrancy. When it was finally returned to Ashwood Manor, Clara, Evelyn, Jonas and Michael gathered in the main hall for the unveiling. Jonas had already hung a second portrait beside where Amélie's would go, the painting of young Evelyn that had been hidden in the library for decades. "3 generations of Ashwood women," Jonas announced as he pulled away the cloth covering Amélie's restored portrait. "Together at last." The portrait was stunning. Amélie's eyes seemed to look directly at the viewer, full of fierce maternal love. Baby Clara's face was peaceful, oblivious to the tragedy about to unfold. Michael stepped forward and gently touched the frame. "Thank you," he said to Evelyn, "for letting me be part of this, for letting me know our daughter." "Thank you for giving me a reason to stop hiding," Evelyn replied. Clara moved to stand between the two portraits, her grandmother young and laughing, her mother holding Clara as an infant. Then she pulled out her phone and took a selfie, positioning it so all 3 generations were visible, the portraits behind her and her own face in the present. "For my half-siblings," she explained, "so they can see where I come from." That evening, Clara received a text from Michael's daughter, Lily. "You look just like her, like our sister. Can't wait to meet you for real. Dad says you're cool. Prove him right." Clara laughed and showed the message to Evelyn. "You have a family now," her grandmother said. "A real family, not just ghosts and regrets." "I've always had family," Clara corrected gently. "I just didn't know it until I came here." Summer came to Ashwood Manor, bringing warmth and light to rooms that had known only cold and shadow for decades. Clara quit her job with the nursing agency and stayed on as Evelyn's full-time caregiver. Not because she needed the money, but because she wanted to be there, wanted to know her grandmother in the time they had left. Michael visited twice a month, bringing his wife Sarah and the kids. At first, the meetings were awkward. 2 teenagers unsure how to relate to their adult half-sister, a wife trying to gracefully accept the complication Clara represented. But gradually, they found their rhythm. Lily, the 15-year-old, was obsessed with true crime and peppered Clara with questions about the mystery of finding her family. Jake, 17, was quieter, but asked thoughtful questions about Amélie and what she'd been like. Sarah brought practical gifts, casseroles for the freezer, new curtains for the guest rooms, suggestions for physical therapy exercises that might help Evelyn's mobility. She never said it explicitly, but Clara understood. Sarah was trying to mother her in the way Amélie should have been able to. Jonas watched these family gatherings with visible emotion, often excusing himself to wipe his eyes. "Thomas would have loved this," he told Clara one evening. "All this life in the house again, all this noise and chaos and love." "Tell me more about him," Clara requested. So Jonas did. He told stories about Thomas that made Clara laugh, about pranks he'd pulled on his father, about books he'd smuggled to Jonas from the library, about plans they'd made to run away together someday. "We were going to move to San Francisco," Jonas said. "Open a bookshop, live openly as partners in a city that might actually let us be happy. I'm sorry you never got that chance." "Me too," Jonas smiled sadly. "But staying here let me watch over Evelyn. Let me save Amélie from the fire. And eventually, let me help you find your way home. Maybe that was the life I was meant to live." "You deserve happiness too, Jonas." "I've had happiness. It just looked different than I expected." By autumn, Evelyn's health had declined significantly. The burst of energy she'd experienced after Clara's arrival had sustained her for months, but age and illness were catching up. The doctor explained it gently. Evelyn's heart was failing. She had weeks, maybe a month or 2 at most. Clara held her grandmother's hand while the doctor delivered the news. "I'm not afraid," Evelyn said after he left. "I've been waiting to die for 37 years, but now I can go peacefully, knowing Amélie didn't hate me, knowing you exist, knowing the Ashwood legacy won't end in poison and pain. What do you want these last weeks to look like? Clara asked. Evelyn thought for a moment. I want family dinners. I want to sit in the garden and feel the sun. I want to tell you every story I can remember about Amélie before I forget them. She squeezed Clara's hand. And I want to be forgiven. You are forgiven, Grandma. By you, perhaps. But I need to make peace with Amélie. Clara understood. Come with me. She helped Evelyn outside for the first time in years. They walked slowly, painfully, down the gravel path that led to the family cemetery at the edge of the property. Clara had discovered it weeks earlier. A small plot surrounded by an iron fence overgrown with wild roses. Most of the stones were for Ashwoods going back generations, but one, in the far corner, was newer. Amélie Morrison, 1968-2003. Beloved mother, rest in the peace you couldn't find in life. Clara had arranged for the stone herself, working with Michael to craft the inscription. They'd had Amélie's remains moved from the anonymous grave in Oregon to rest here among her ancestors, in the place she'd tried so hard to escape. Now, standing before her daughter's grave, Evelyn collapsed to her knees and wept. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry, baby. I should have been braver. Should have loved you more than I feared your father. Should have. She knows, Grandma. Clara knelt beside her. Wherever she is, she knows. Evelyn reached out and touched the gravestone, her fingers tracing Amélie's name. I hope so, she whispered. I hope she knows I loved her. That losing her destroyed me, that I've spent every day since regretting my choices. They stayed there until the sun began to set, grandmother and granddaughter, saying goodbye to the woman who'd connected them across time and pain. Evelyn Ashwood died on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 37 years, and 1 week after she'd watched her daughter taken away. She went peacefully, in her sleep, with Clara holding her hand. The funeral was small. Michael and his family came. Jonas stood stoic and silent. A few distant Ashwood relatives appeared, drawn by the possibility of inheritance, but they left quickly when they realized Evelyn had left everything to Clara. They buried Evelyn next to Amélie. Clara read a poem her mother had written years ago, found among the papers in the nursery. When I am gone and you remember, remember not my pain. Remember how I loved you. Remember love remains. After the service, Clara stood between the two graves, her mother's and her grandmother's, and felt a sense of completion she hadn't known was possible. They're together now, Michael said softly, standing beside her. Yes, finally. What will you do with the house? Clara had been thinking about that. The logical thing would be to sell it. Ashwood Manor was worth a fortune, even in its dilapidated state. The money could set her up for life, but the house had become more than just property. I'm going to keep it, she decided. Restore it. Turn it into something good. Like what? Clara smiled. A home for teenagers aging out of foster care. A place where kids like I was can find family and stability. Where the Ashwood name means safety instead of pain. Michael's eyes misted. Amélie would have loved that. I think so too. 2 years later, Ashwood Manor looked nothing like the decaying tomb Clara had first entered. The restoration had been extensive. Rotten wood replaced, walls repainted, gardens tamed but not destroyed. The house still maintained its Gothic grandeur, but now that grandeur welcomed instead of warned. The main hall held 3 portraits in gold frames. Evelyn as a young woman laughing at the camera, Amélie holding baby Clara, love and terror in her eyes, and a new portrait, commissioned by Clara, the 3 of them together, Evelyn, Amélie and Clara, painted from imagination and photographs. 3 generations of Ashwood women united at last. Below the portraits, a plaque read, "In memory of Evelyn and Amélie Ashwood, who taught us that love survives even the darkest legacies, and that it's never too late to come home." Clara stood in the hall, watching as 6 teenagers, her first residents, explored their new home with a mixture of wonder and cautious hope. These kids knew about broken families, about secrets and lies and feeling alone in the world. But here, in this house that had once held so much pain, they would learn something different. They would learn that family wasn't about blood or names or legacy. It was about who held you when you were broken, who fought for you when the world was cruel, who loved you even when loving hurt. Jonas appeared at Clara's elbow, older and slower, but still managing the property with quiet efficiency. "You did it," he said. "You turned the poison into medicine." "We did it," Clara corrected. "You, me, Grandma, Dad, all of us. Thomas would be proud. I think Mum and Grandma are proud too." In the parlor, the piano played softly. But now it was played by human hands, one of the teenagers tentatively picking out a melody. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily forward, marking time that mattered again. And through the open windows the sound of laughter drifted out across the grounds where roses bloomed wild and free, no longer tended, but no longer dying either. Just growing the way they were meant to, the way everything in Ashwood Manor was finally allowed to grow. Clara walked to the front door and looked out at the long driveway where Amélie had watched her life drive away 37 years ago. But that wasn't the end of the story. It never had been. Because sometimes the past doesn't come back to haunt us. Sometimes it comes back to save us. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the people we thought were lost are just waiting to be found. Clara touched the rose locket still hanging around her neck, passed from Evelyn to Amélie to herself, and smiled. "I found you, Mom," she whispered. "I found us all." And in the gardens, where the wind moved through the roses like invisible fingers, it almost sounded like someone singing, a lullaby, soft and eternal. "Sleep now, little one, dream of days to come."